tonight. A separatist in Paris trying to sell Quebec independence abroad. Stopping all this, can more talk save the Middle East peace process? And selling an education fund, but delivering a broken promise. Goldhawk Fights Back.
CTV News with Sandie Rinaldo.
Good evening. The separatist movement's top leader is working the international scene. Quebec Premier Lucien Bouchard is in France for a 5-day visit to shore up support for Quebec's sovereignty. The last time Bouchard was there on an official basis, it was as Canada's ambassador. Now, nearly 10 years later, he's returned, but with a completely different agenda. Bouchard is there to bolster the separatist French connection. With more on the Premier's mission, here is CTV's Rosemary Thompson.
It was a welcome fit for a head of state. Quebec Premier Lucien Bouchard hopes to become a national leader one day. He was met by the French National Guard. He expects France will play a critical role if Quebecers vote for sovereignty.
It is also important that this recognition be achieved with all countries in the world, but of course France, because of the special relationship with Quebec, is one of the most important of them.
Historically, France has shown sympathy for Quebec independence.
Vive le Québec libre!
General Charles de Gaulle's successors are just as clear.
I think France should be the first to endorse this situation.
Jacques was the mayor of Paris when he promised to recognize Quebec independence. It was 10 months before the referendum. Now he's president of France. Bouchard is counting on a repeat performance when he meets Jacques on Monday. We're not taking it for granted, he says, but we know what has been said in the past. Back then, Chirac's comments upset the Canadian embassy in Paris. Benoit Bouchard was ambassador. He expects French politicians to be cautious because a sovereignty vote may be several years away.
I would be very surprised that today the president of France, who is the same Mr. Chirac, would come and say, I support the independence of Quebec.
So far, the French media isn't showing much interest in the visit, but France isn't the audience Bouchard is targeting.
Like all Quebec premiers, he will be playing 90% for the home crowd.
As Paris counts down to the year 2000, Bouchard hopes the millennium will mark Quebec's declaration of independence. He'll make that case to the French president and prime minister this week, as officials at the Canadian embassy hope France won't interfere into a domestic matter. Rosemary Thompson, CTV News, Paris.
While Lucien Bouchard is in France, opposition to his government's cost-cutting plans is mounting at home. Thousands of angry Quebecers packed a Montreal area auditorium today to protest provincial plans to download $500 million in expenses onto the municipalities. More than 6,000 Montreal Island residents showed up to send a defiant message to Quebec City. The event was organized by Montreal's 27 suburban mayors who say the downloading will mean higher taxes and cuts to services.
We really have to stand up together now, all 27 mayors and all 800,000 people, and tell Quebec it's over, no more. We've had it up to here.
The mayors say they will keep up the pressure and plan to hold a demonstration at the National Assembly. As the battle over spending cuts heats up, 2 French alternative newspapers in Quebec are promising to make some cuts of their own. Montreal weeklies Ici and Voir have promised to cut coverage of unity squabbles, a promise that would thrill most Canadians. Ici is promising it will be a constitution-free zone. Coincidentally, its main rival, Voir, published a similar story the same day saying it too would ban the C word. Overseas tonight, there has been a major development in the stalled Middle East peace talks. In a surprise move, Israeli and Palestinian officials have agreed to try to resume negotiations. Israel decided to soften its stand after the Palestinians cracked down on suspected terrorists. CTV's Elliott Shiff reports.
The weekend started with the seemingly endless cycle of anger and violence. Loud protests in Gaza marking the 1-year anniversary of Israel's decision to open a controversial tunnel under the Western Wall. But this morning, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his cabinet he expects peace talks with Palestinians to resume. That following a decision to free up $17 million in taxes it was holding back from the Palestinian Authority. Money the Israeli government refused to pay until it was convinced the Palestinians were cracking down on terror. Palestinian police have arrested more than 70 activists from the Islamic resistance movement Hamas, the group that has claimed responsibility for the 2 recent suicide bombings that killed 20 Israelis. The crackdown comes after the revelation that a network of suicide bombers came from this village just outside the West Bank town of Nablus.
I think that the Palestinians will have to be fighting terror consistently, aggressively, and over a long period of time in order to make this peace process work.
The biggest stumbling block on the Palestinian side has been Israel's refusal to stop building settlements. The controversial Har Homa housing project helped set off this current crisis. 2 weeks ago, a number of Israelis moved into this apartment in Arab East Jerusalem. And just last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu announced the construction of 300 more units at the Israeli settlement of Efrat.
Before any resumption of talks continues, there has to be a total cessation of all settlement activities. Otherwise, the talks will be meaningless, without substance, without credibility.
The 2 sides may finally be getting back together, but it's clear that most of the hope and goodwill that existed between Israelis and Palestinians has long since vanished. The big question remains, is there enough real interest in both camps to get what's left of the peace process back on track? Elliott, Shiff, CTV News, Jerusalem.
And amidst the renewed optimism in the Middle East, there was a warning of more violence from militant Palestinian groups. One of those groups, Hamas, opposes the peace process and has used suicide bombings to derail negotiations. Today, Hamas vowed to launch fresh attacks against Israel. Still to come, where there's smoke. California chokes under a dry, hot season. Also ahead, failing grades for an education fund. Goldhawk fights back. A ferocious wildfire in Northern California is leaving a massive trail of destruction in its wake. While more than 1,000 families were forced out of the area, others chose to stay behind to defend their homes. Firefighters are desperately trying to tackle the flames from both land and air, but dry, windy weather conditions have not helped their efforts. Sandra Hughes has the story.
Hot temperatures, low humidity, and high winds worked against firefighters, who labored all day today trying to contain the blaze that burned about 5,500 acres in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. About 150 miles northeast of San Francisco, the blaze, which started yesterday, spread rapidly last night and forced 1,000 people from their homes. 20 houses were destroyed as the fire burned through the rural town of Oregon House.
Yes, this is the backside of our house here.
Jim McGill watched helplessly while the flames raced through his backyard, just missing his home.
It was raining fireballs.
Despite erratic winds that caused the flames to swirl around the town, hitting structures indiscriminately, this woman refused to leave when most of the town was evacuated. She stayed and saved her home.
We just wet everything down, and we even used the little sprayers and got around the edges.
According to officials, the fire was started by an electrical malfunction of a generator hooked up to a motorhome. While the blaze isn't yet contained, firefighters say unless the winds shift again, no other houses are in danger of being destroyed. Sandra Hughes, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And briefly in other news tonight, heavy rains are hampering the search for the flight recorder in a deadly crash in Indonesia. 234 people were killed when the Indonesian Airbus crashed Friday. The second trial in the Oklahoma City bombing case starts tomorrow. Terry Nichols is charged with conspiring to set off the bomb that killed 168 people. He could get the death penalty. And NATO soldiers held a series of mock assaults in Greece. There is speculation that they are training for the possible arrest of a top war crime suspect, Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic. NATO has stepped up its commitment to arresting war criminals in recent months. And now a story that touches on the concerns of many parents. With the cost of tuition skyrocketing, many families are wondering if they will be able to send their children to university. And that's what Tom and Kathy Carroll were worried about when a salesman came to their door selling education funds. The couple thought it was a great investment, but then they discovered what they'd really bought was a life insurance policy. That's when they called Dale Goldhawk and asked him to fight back.
Josh, which cat?
The immediate issue in the Carroll family is deciding which of their farm neighbors needs one of these.
and which kittens will make the best mousers when they grow up. When the boys grow up, Tom and Kathy Carroll want them to be able to go to university. That's why, since 1993, they have invested $5,000 in what they thought was the Canadian Education Fund for Children. But the company, now out of business, was just acting as an independent agent, selling Imperial life insurance policies.
And I demanded to find out what was happening with their money. And then finally, when I did, then they just come out flat and told me that we did not buy a Canadian Education Fund, we bought a life insurance policy.
Period.
Period, yeah.
Imperial Life told him he was stuck. He could not get his $5,000 back. But Tom Carroll already had enough life insurance to protect his family. He and Kathy wanted all their money to go into a fund that might get their sons to a place like this someday. Knowing how expensive this education is, Tom and Kathy wanted every dollar to count.
Nice to meet you.
We asked Imperial Life to reconsider their decision to keep the $5,000.
When Mr. Carroll got in touch with me, we looked in his file and spoke with him a few times. He'd actually been in touch with our office several times before he called you.
Imperial conceded that while the policy the Carrolls bought has some cash value after a number of years, it really wasn't what the Carrolls were looking for.
So for somebody who really just wants a long-term savings plan, this is not the product.
So then, under the circumstances, what did Imperial Life do?
We refunded all his premiums. He had paid into the plan, I believe, for about 4 years, and so we refunded all of the premiums.
The Carrolls were not the only family to buy into the Canadian Education Fund for Children. Their next-door neighbors were also fooled.
They found out it was the same deal, so.
And he thought it was an education fund,
He thought it was exactly the same as me. He said he just told me yesterday he would have been paying into it for the next 10, 15, 20 years and thinking it was an education fund. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And but they made a call and used your name and told them, and they got their money back a lot quicker than I did. Yeah.
So, Dale, are there other people having problems with education funds masquerading as life insurance?
Well, we haven't heard of them yet, but there may well be, and Imperial Life, I hope, would treat them the same way that they've treated the Carrolls and the Carrolls' next-door neighbors.
Give them their money back.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the merits of investing in an education fund.
Well, this kind of an education fund, which is simply a life insurance policy that has some cash equity after a number of years, does give you that cash equity, but it's not the best, wisest investment. Mutual funds these days, any number of guaranteed investment certificates, all of these things give higher interest. So if you're concerned just about, building a fund for the education of your children, don't try life insurance. It's not the best way to go.
Dale Goldhawk, thank you.
Thank you, Sandie.
And coming up, new habits on Parliament Hill.
God has spoken. The Senate will never be the same.
A nun goes to the Senate, but this is no Sister Act. It was a record-breaking day for thousands of Canadians taking part in the annual AIDS Walk. They raised $3 million for AIDS research and care, topping last year's total by $400,000. Walkers in 65 communities across the country took part in the event. The largest walks were in Toronto and Montreal. Olympic gold medalist and AIDS Walk chair Mark Tewksbury in black joined marchers in Toronto, while in Montreal, thousands of people donated their time and energy. Participants said the walk was also a way to remember those who had died from the disease. Also remembered today were the 6 Canadian law enforcement officers who died in the line of duty last year. Nearly 5,000 officers from across Canada and the United States took part in a somber ceremony on Parliament Hill. Wreaths were laid by the caps of fallen officers. It's the 20th year that a national memorial service of this kind has been held. As the Canadian Senate gets down to work tomorrow, a new face is sure to attract some attention. Some say Liberal Senator Peggy Butts from Cape Breton Island is actually heaven sent. Butts isn't playing politics for the pay or the perks. In fact, she's donating her hefty senatorial salary to charity. And she's promising to fight for the underprivileged in the halls of power. CTV's Ben Shin has more.
earned it. You deserve it. Thank you very much.
Peggy Butts, on her way to Ottawa to serve in the Senate. The upper chamber may sound like a lofty workplace, but this rookie senator's undaunted. She has, after all, spent a lifetime answering to an even higher authority.
Sister Peggy is here. Watch your language.
Senator Butts is a nun, the first ever appointed to the Senate.
This is just a kind of a novelty, but it'll wear off.
Judging by what Cape Breton Islanders are saying and writing to Sister Peggy, it may be wise for her Senate colleagues not to cross her.
God has spoken. The Senate will never be the same.
For starters, this senator has taken a vow of poverty. She's donating her entire salary to charity, and she's going to live in a convent in Ottawa, just like she does here in Sydney, Nova Scotia.
I hope to be able to do in the Senate what I have been doing all my life, and that's work for social justice.
Which might explain her appointment. The Liberals have promised to devote more of their second term to social issues, and Sister Peggy's certainly an expert, teaching social justice at university, helping food banks and women's shelters, sometimes reaching out to individuals, like the way she raised the cash to buy this van. With it, this father of two started a fish wholesale business 3 years ago, when he was suddenly laid off with no prospects.
I was thinking about her all week when I heard this announcement, and yes, I'm going to miss her very much, but I'll know she'll be working for us. I know that for a fact.
There's high praise, too, from another Nova Scotian from the other side of the political and economic spectrum, the former Tory Premier.
I've really never known her to be a partisan Liberal. She's a people's person.
That's certainly the impression Sister Peggy gave Prime Minister Chrétien at their first meeting, when she spoke up on government policy.
Oh, he said I gave him, you can say the word, starts with H.
One H word she will say with passion is Habs, as in Montreal Canadiens. The 73-year-old Glace Bay native will see her beloved team more often, but she's already learning how Ottawa can change a person.
They've already told me I have to start cheering for Ottawa Senators, and that'll be difficult.
Ben Chen, CTV News, Sydney.
From the political circuit to the Formula One circuit, Canadian race car driver Jacques Villeneuve continues to eye his competitors from his rearview mirror. Today, he won the Luxembourg Grand Prix. Villeneuve crossed the finish line nearly 12 seconds ahead of his nearest competitor for his 7th win of the season. With the victory, Villeneuve moves into first place in the rankings. With 2 races to go, if he holds his lead, Villeneuve would become the first Canadian to capture the Formula One title. When we return, in search of Bill Gates, a computer whiz kid on the hunt for the master of Microsoft.
A mentor would really further broaden my horizons.
The life of a child prodigy is not always an easy one, as 10-year-old Aaron Simpson found out. He's a whiz kid from Ancaster, Ontario, who recently made computer history. He's the youngest certified Microsoft specialist ever, and was hoping that Bill Gates himself would become his mentor. CTV's Mark Schneider has more on this young man's search for guidance.
If you happen by the Simpson home, you just might catch a glimpse of the prodigy of Ancaster, 10-year-old Aaron. No, it's not his cello, but his computer that's made history. Aaron is the youngest ever to become certified as a Microsoft product specialist. That means he knows enough about computers to embarrass a room full of know-it-alls.
It's neat because now when I tell an adult that I can help them with their computer, they have to believe me because I have the certification to prove it.
What a thrill! Microsoft stepped in with equipment and support. And if you skim this letter from Bill Gates quickly, well, it got Aaron thinking.
Well, I'm still just 10, so I don't really have any career-wise decisions. But I would like to follow a path, well, something related to computers.
What Aaron was looking for was a Microsoft-appointed mentor.
Well, since I don't go to school, my learning has been so far pretty much discovery-based, and I think that a mentor would really further broaden my horizons.
Aaron, for all his precocity, developed an expectation that, having made Microsoft history, Microsoft would stand by him as he reached his next stage. Alas, it was not to be, as this Microsoft spokesperson informed us by PictureTell.
We like the fact that he has interest in us and that he has interest in Microsoft and chooses that as part of his future. And we want to do things with him, but we still want to continue to reinforce that there's all sorts of things in life.
Now take a closer look at Bill Gates' letter, especially where he encourages Aaron, in so many words, to get a life, a kid's life.
One of the things that he did write in Aaron's letter, to be very clear, was we really enjoy the passion in the technology, but diversify and in be intrigued by life.
I'm sorry to say, I don't know. I'm sure Microsoft has reasons for it, but I don't know.
By the way, Aaron is still looking for a mentor, someone who is willing to stand by this prodigy without peers. For CTV, I'm Mark S. at whimsy.com.
That's our newscast for this Sunday. Lloyd Robertson will be here tomorrow night. I'm Sandie Rinaldo. Good night. See you soon.
News every 15 minutes. Coming soon.